The crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, the unpredictable force of Mother Nature. From humid nights,
and when you get into summer or the heat and humidity, just the home run totals go up.
To windy afternoons.
High fly ball, it's swirling around out in the outfield. There's a lot more space. You may think it comes hot off the bat, and then it kind of takes a little bit.
This week, we are going off the radar and into the outfield to understand the weather impacts on America's favorite pastime. I'll talk to a veteran sports reporter about what she has seen in her years of covering the game. I'll also speak to a baseball scientist from the MLB about how the new use of wind modeling in ballparks is changing the game.
Every time there was a pitch, every time there was a hit, we had calculated wind impact and weather impact for that play.
As well as helping to solve old home run conspiracy theories.
But Ted Williams' home run would have gone about 530. We've never measured anything close to that.
So get yourself some peanuts and Cracker Jacks as we explore baseball's meteorological mysteries. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie, and you're listening to Off the Radar, a production of the National Weather Desk. On the show, we dig deep into topics about weather, climate, the ocean, space, and much more. Our goal is to help you better understand the weather and to love it as much as we do.
This new year, why not let Audible expand your life by listening? Explore over 1 million audiobooks, podcasts, and exclusive Audible originals that'll inspire and motivate you. Tap into your well-being with advice and insight from leading professionals and experts on better health, relationships, career, finance, investing, and more. Maybe you want to kick a bad habit or start a good one. If you're interested in learning how to master your emotions and hearing scientifically backed advice for using your emotions as a tool, may I suggest Shift by psychologist and bestseller author Dr. Ethan Kross? Trust me, listening on Audible can help you reach the goals you set for yourself. Start listening today when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Off the Radar. Emily Gracie here. Baseball season is also here, so I thought I'd bring back this super amazing episode from last year. If you missed it, you're in for a treat. I'm talking to Clay Nunnally, who's the MLB baseball scientist. If you're like me, you didn't know that was even a thing. But his job is actually pretty cool. And Clay's a super smart guy. His undergrad and graduate degrees are in physics, and he has a PhD in electrical engineering. But these days, he spends a lot of time looking at winds in baseball stadiums, not just present and future, but also the past. So if you're into sports betting at all, you're going to want to pay attention to what he has to say. You're also going to want to hear from my first guest, Morgan Adsit. She's a sports reporter that's been covering the game for nearly 2 decades. She's seen it all and has some really interesting observations when it comes to weather and baseball. If you haven't already, make sure you're following the podcast on your favorite platform. We have some amazing episodes coming up this spring. Next week, we'll hear from 2 former NOAA employees about science communication. And then in May, we're diving deep into all things tropical. With the upcoming hurricane season, I'll have the latest tropical science with the folks from the National Hurricane Center. Also, please give me a follow on Instagram. I'm posting clips from the show and all the latest weather news. Just search Off the Radar Podcast. Happy spring, everyone, and please enjoy my conversations with Morgan Adsit and Clay Nunnally. Morgan Adsit, welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Oh,
About time.
I know. Well, you know what? You're not a meteorologist, so I had to wait until the appropriate time to have you on the show. But
Just say I'm not smart enough. That's fine.
No. Very different kind of smart. And it's fun because people can't see us right now, so they can't mix us up. But when we work together, people were constantly calling us by each other's names. It's just funny.
Any blonde will
I was going to say, we don't really look that much alike either. Okay, so Morgan Adsit, you are a sports anchor and reporter for Fox 45 in Baltimore. We worked together for many years. We've known each other for many years. You've been my friend for a long time, so I'm thrilled to have you on and to talk about this stuff that I really know nothing about and need your expertise on. So,
I think we can put both our heads together on this topic and we'll make it make sense.
One person who's capable of carrying on a conversation. Okay. So I've been wanting to do this episode for a while because it's a merging of baseball and weather. And there's this group that has created weather modeling in baseball stadiums. But I'm curious from you, because you have been a sports anchor for a very long time now, what you have noticed over the years when you've been in these ballparks. I know a lot of your career has been kind of Camden Yards based, but you've traveled too. So have you noticed anything about the way the ball moves or the way the game is played based on the different stadiums?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest thing with Camden Yards and really any time of the year for any baseball season, when you get into summer or the heat and humidity, just the home run totals go up. You'll see velocity, exit. You can chime in on the thick air and what humidity does, but just kind of having, I'm sure, like some just thickness and wet, it just makes the ball travel and carry. So home run totals usually always go up in the summer. And when you hear of a player that started out kind of late March, April, maybe even May, like a little bit slumping, that's not for the power or not for the extra base hits, it's kind of like wait and see. And then you see it really turn on in the summer. That's the biggest thing.
It's interesting that you notice that, because I think we know that as meteorologists that, yes, we call it thicker air, but it's actually less dense. Humid air is less dense. So the ball technically should be traveling farther through that air. But to somebody who doesn't know that about air and density, I'm surprised that it's that noticeable.
It is, and it's talked about. I mean, when you're covering the game, just as far as the hit totals and the home run for power and how hitters love it, pitchers might not love it. And then you also have just the whole, when it is really hot and humid, and the Orioles had a game earlier in the season where it was just kind of gross. It was sticky. And Cole Irvin, one of their starting pitchers, said, and it was during spring training, like he had trouble like holding onto the ball. So it's just, like the wetness and sweat. And
to use your favorite word, it was moist. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm over that now. Yeah, you can say moist all day long. But it's just, it's a fine line between when it's working for you. Because for a pitcher, if it's, maybe you have some sweat or some sunscreen, and then you pick up the rosin bag, and then you got a little bit of a combination, and they check for all this stuff. Sunscreen played into it, old school hair mousse. I mean, there are little ways to kind of get around some things, but they are checked for illegal substances. But if you have that sweet spot combination, you got the grip. But if it's just really gross, or they're just having a hard time with sweaty, it's not so much you're making the sticky, it's just wet, and it's hard to command the ball and hold on to it, especially when you're tossing mid to high 90s, you can easily lose control of it. And just as much as the home run can fly out, the ball can kind of fly in as well.
Interesting. Okay, so then another weather element that's not talked about quite as much, but is a huge factor, maybe even bigger, is wind. And
Yep.
Clay was saying that it's not as big of a factor anymore because of the way that the fields are built. They're built up so high. There's so many seats. It's much more protected. But like back in the day, home runs technically used to go farther because they could pick up wind and just take off. And he actually did an analysis of Ted Williams' home run, which I'm sure you know about, Fenway and that red seat, which I didn't know about, but he did a whole analysis of that. And he was like, a lot of players say that there's no way it could have gone this far. But in his like forensic analysis using this wind modeling, he said it actually went farther because of the way home runs are measured is different than how it used to be. And
there's a technology too. You can actually see it get hit now. You can like actually grab the cameras and all the replays and like, boom, it hit right here on Utah Street at Kidman Yards. Let's make them a plaque. A lot of that stuff, I'm sure the technology played into it as well. But wind is a huge factor. Pitchers, batters get it. Maybe not as much, but fielding. Fielding's huge. High fly ball, it's swirling around out in the outfield. There's a lot more space. You may think it comes hot off the bat, and then it kind of takes a little bit. So you'll see a lot of fielders when you get in those conditions, especially in postseason in October when it gets a little bit colder and chillier. You'll see them really out in the outfield taking way more reps pregame just to kind of get the feel. Or if they've never played that outfield, what's so unique to baseball is there are certain rules for dimensions, and then all ballparks are different. And really, Camden Yards was kind of the first to do that asymmetrical outfield, which is just a different, unique design that makes it look nice. And there has to be certain rules you have to hit, but all outfields are different. Some are larger, some are smaller. I loosely covered the Reds, but I'm from Southwest Ohio. So when we go home, we go to Reds games a lot. They call that Great American Small Park instead of ballpark because they had some logistics with just the Ohio rivers right there. And we can only have so much space here. And it was already kind of like smaller anyways. And it helps with the home runs. But all of that stuff factors into how these players field, not only the way the ballpark looks, but the weather that's attributing, like hey, this is literally on the water in San Francisco and Cincinnati. You can see the water from the outfield. That's going to play in. Baltimore, you can't see the water, but the humidity and the weather elements come all around that as well. So geographically speaking, where ballparks are and weather plays in huge.
Have you seen this new, the weather applied metric system that they just started using last year? Because they said a lot of it has to do with kind of pleasing the broadcast partners and showing like what winds are doing during the game.
I have not. No, we get mass in here locally and like they never pop anything up on the screen. I know they have that technology and they'll talk about it, but as far as getting my eyes and hands on it, I have not. What I really see, and I don't know if you guys dabbled in this, and weather is huge. And I'm not saying this to offend anybody, but baseball fans are sometimes baseball nerds in a good way because they know the science, they know the numbers. You'll see a lot of this play in with betting. If the weather is going to affect the pitcher, like, do I need to move the line? Do I need to bet that game because it's really hot and humid and they have a lot of power in their lineup?
There could be like a huge convergence of nerds if you factor in the weather nerds and the baseball nerds and get them together. You're going to have baseball fans out there with like
the betting
anemometers.
nerds already have that element. Because you'll hear a lot of betting experts talk about, well, the weather in Pittsburgh, the weather in San Francisco, the weather in LA, LA weather. I don't really think that's played too much into it, but they definitely are on that in the betting world of factoring in ballpark, not only lineup and talent, pitchers, matchups, but ballpark design, and weather.
Interesting. That's very cool.
Are you going to start gambling now?
I might. I'm not much of a gambler, but yeah, I might. Okay, cool. Well, so today, as I kind of talked about, Clay Nunnally is technically a baseball scientist for MLB. And I kind of found him online because he was writing these articles about the stuff that we've been talking about. And it's very cool because he's been instrumental in kind of getting this weather, wind modeling into the ballparks and then understanding it and then also doing forensics on old situations to see like the Ted Williams thing. Did this happen? So I'm going to talk to him today all about that. Morgan Adsit, thank you so much for your expertise today.
Of course.
You said a lot of stuff I didn't understand, but I know it's all very smart and very correct. So don't doubt yourself.
Just remember, all ballparks are different. Some rules do apply, but sometimes you're geographically landlocked or challenged. Like the ballparks all have to face the same way because the ball has to be coming in with sunlight and where the sun is up for the majority of the games. I know day games factor in, but all that stuff's real and goes into, like, they just don't find land and plop a stadium down. I mean, there's a reason they have to be turned a certain way or look a certain way. And then all the outfields are different.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Morgan.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Now here's my conversation with Clay Nunnally. You have the coolest job ever. I didn't even know this position existed. You are the MLB scientist. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think my actual title is baseball scientist, but I'm really just a normal scientist and I work on baseball problems. So I think what that means is that I help us measure things about baseball and our environment so we can make good decisions, create good data, and get good content and engagement with fans so we could tell good stories about baseball.
So were you a baseball player? Like, did you grow up playing baseball?
It's like in junior high. So my career stopped about 8th grade. And then I went on to other things.
Okay, so let's talk about weather elements in baseball. I'm going to break it down because obviously we're going to get into wind, but that's not the only factor that affects the baseball in the game. Humidity is a factor too, right? I feel like I hear a lot of people talking about humidity and the ball moving a different way because of the level of moisture in the atmosphere. So can you kind of tell me the different weather factors and how they're impacting the game?
Yeah, and to back off a little bit, baseball is unique among our major sports because we're played in all kinds of different facilities, all types of different venues. We've got ballparks that were built in 1912, 1914, and then built more recently. And so we'll talk more about weather and wind in a second, but baseball is also like, it kind of tells you what's going on in the atmosphere. We've got a park here in Colorado that's a mile high, and there's less air resistance here. So balls travel further when they're hit, and they don't slow down as much when you pitch them. Another consequence of that is they don't move as much when you pitch in a place with low atmospheric density. One of the things MLB does, we, along with Rawlings, try to make a very uniform product. And part of that, we want the tradition of handmade baseball with traditional materials, and those are kind of hard to control. But one of the things we do is we try to keep the storage environment consistent across all parks. So we actually have humidors in all parks in Major League Baseball. Like a sponge, baseballs absorb moisture when they're in a moist environment, and they dry out when they're in a dried environment. The more water they hold, the heavier they get. So it changes properties of the ball, like not only how far it carries, but also how squishy it is, how bouncy it is when it hits. So we tried the best we can to be consistent in how we handle the ball.
What about the bats? I mean, they're made of wood, right? So are those morphine too?
Yeah. So, bats, like any collision object, are going to change with temperature more than anything. But we don't have a ton of guidelines around bats. They're a little bit less sensitive to environmental variation than the balls are.
So tell me about how winds are affecting the ball specifically, because there are like mathematical equations, right?
Yeah, and I think we do a good job of measuring lots of things about baseball. We track balls really well. We track players. We have lots of data and stats around everything. But one thing we didn't do very well is measure wind. So all these years we've understood a little bit about the wind that makes the flags blow in one direction or another, the prevailing winds at some ballpark, but we didn't really understand exactly what was going on around the field of play. So in the wind shelter created by the stands, we didn't know that very well. So more recently, Emily, we contracted with this company called Weather Applied Metrics, and that's what they do. They're basically, you can see the prevailing wind at a stadium, but you can't see what's going on inside that's affecting the ball. Instead of measuring that, we still can't measure that very well. But Weather Applied Metrics can model it. So they have a really good 3D model of what the stadium looks like, what buildings that surround the stadium look like in terms of fluid dynamics, and they can calculate pretty much every possible direction and magnitude to figure out how the wind interacts with the stadium and affects home runs and pitches. So the first year where we had this at every single park in Major League Baseball was in 2023. So we, every time there was a pitch, every time there was a hit, we had calculated wind impact and weather impact for that play. So put all that data together, we start understanding why venues play the way they do and other things that affect the events we see on field.
Okay, and they've been at this for years, because I remember going to a conference like many years ago and talking to one of their meteorologists about this model, but MLB just kind of got into the business of taking on this model and applying it to the ballparks. So can you take me through the process of what that was like? Because you did kind of a testing process first, right, on a few of the ballparks?
Before 2023, we did some pilot parks. So Weather Applied Metrics was in a handful of parks, and that told us what was possible. So you could see how much a hit could be impacted by wind and how much pitchers, at least in that venue, could be impacted by wind. But we didn't understand how it worked in aggregate. So we started out looking at this data in a few parks, and we could see examples of a home run being pushed a long ways by wind, or a fly ball being pushed, upwards of 100 feet for one play. So we started to get an idea of the magnitude of the impact of wind, which we could have guessed, qualitatively, but we can never really calculate quantitatively until now.
What's really cool too is like the specifics of each ballpark. So I'm curious which ballparks you piloted in, and then the kind of the differences you saw there. Did anything really stand out from the different ballparks based on like their shape or structure or what's around them?
Yeah, that's the interesting part, I think, is because one of the pilot parks was Wrigley. And Wrigley's very old park, and it's built into a neighborhood. So it's not surrounded by parking lots. It is, very close to a giant body of water that dominates weather in that region, but it's also in a neighborhood. It's probably not the tallest structure in Wrigleyville. So wind interacts with all the buildings around Wrigley, and then, of course, the actual ballpark itself. The thing about Wrigley that stood out was the variation in wind direction. So other parks, the other really interesting park is San Francisco, because it's got a very, very strong wind, the strongest wind of any park, but it's also consistent. Like every single night, there's the wind coming in off the ocean, making everyone in the crowd freeze, but it also has very, very persistent effects on pitching and hitting, but effects on pitching there that are so consistent that changes the behavior of pitching at the park. So those are like the two of the pilot parks that are different. One park has really strong winds that are always in the same direction. Then Wrigley has really strong winds also that can come from any direction and change the character of the game based on what direction it comes from.
Okay, and so then last year was the first year with all the ballparks. What did you notice last year? Anything interesting stand out to you there that surprised you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing about getting all parks involved is there's more stories to tell for our broadcast partners, but also it gave proper context so we could understand what's typical and what's not typical. All the other parks that we got filled in that context, and we could see which parks have persistent outliers, which parks benefit a right-handed pitcher versus a left-handed pitcher when it comes to breaking pitches in their movement, and which parks can have a headwind and which parks have just really strong tailwinds. There's another piece of this, and it's the drag piece of it. Like we publish what is called the apparent drag or the effective drag of the baseball. And we try to adjust for temperature and pressure and air density and all these things. But that algorithm or that formula doesn't account for wind. And we never calculated wind until now. And what we saw from the data was parks that have significant wind have much lower apparent drag coefficient because they're being pushed by that wind that's between the pitcher's mound and home plate. And that was something where there was some kind of suspicion of, wind does have an effect on the variation of the apparent drag, but we didn't really know how clear that correlation was.
Where is this being used as far as, because it seems like it impacts everybody. It impacts, pitchers, batters, fans, coaches, umps. So I'm curious how this data is used. Is it used to forecast? Is it used in plays, or is it used kind of just in broadcasting and after the fact?
Yeah, so that it's got a lot of great uses, and we're still finding more. But I think it started out, baseball clubs' analytics departments are pretty famous for just trying to find every scrap of data they can to get a competitive advantage. So the more they know about wind, the more they know about what fly balls are going to do, the better they can prepare and make tactics for their defense. The other thing they do is they can better evaluate players if they understand the impact of the environment. And that goes for altitude and wind and everything. You just want to have a very consistent evaluation of talent and not attribute or detract talent from environmental conditions. As a league, we like to use it because we want to tell the story of what's going on in a particular park on a particular night. We've got very interesting plays that wind affected and pushed the ball and changed it from a home run to an out. Those are good stories. Anytime there's significant wind that impacts a play, we want to be able to visualize that, tell our fans that story. The other place that we use the data is it forecasting. For example, we basically have the model of what we think the wind is going to do. This is something Weather Applied Metrics generates. And they'll have, standard trajectories to left field, to center field, to right field, and they can tell you what the typical deflection of those hits will be days in advance. That helps all kinds of people who are interested in predicting the future, which a lot of baseball industry is interested in.
Meteorologists too.
Meteorologists too, yeah.
It seems so local, though. I'm surprised that days in advance you can get accurate information like that on such a local level. Is it changing? Is it constantly updating, though, as the game gets closer?
Yeah, and Weather Applied Metrics is great at this. They start out with, understanding what the probable prevailing conditions are going to be, and then they can derive their in-game model from that. And then as the game gets closer, they'll update it based on, better data or better forecasts. So it keeps getting updated and gets better and better up until game time.
Have you heard any stories from players who have made real use of this and really improved their game based on this information?
Weather Applied Metrics actually has old players as part of their team. And so that's kind of how the idea came about. Brett Jackson was a former baseball player who played in Wrigley quite a bit. And his very insightful initial thought is the ball's not obeying what the flags are telling us. It really speaks to how hard it is to play outfield in Major League Baseball. I think it's really hard to hit a Major League Baseball, but it's also hard to catch one. If you're in outfield and a ball can be pushed by wind up to 100 feet, depending on its trajectory, it's hard to become a machine and track the baseball and catch it.
Okay, so you're forecasting, you're looking at the future, but you're also looking at the past and kind of doing some deep dives here into some past situations, because I was reading your article there about Ted Williams and Fenway. So can you take me through this controversy of, I know players are kind of disagreeing with this whole, he hit the ball, what was it, 502 feet back in 1946. So take me through how this data that you're looking at now is helping to solve old mysteries like that.
Yeah, I might digress on this one because it's my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to baseball. But luckily, we've got this ballpark in Boston that has persisted for over 100 years. And they have one seat in the outfield that's painted red. For anyone who's not familiar with that concept, Ted Williams in June of 1946, hit a ball that hit a fan in the head who was sitting in that seat. In this case, it was really far away from home plate. And estimates back at the time, went from like 450 to 500 feet. And no one knew if it really happened or how far it went. But more recently, we've got really good geospatial data of parks from LiDAR measurements. And we can see that seat actually is 495 feet away from home plate. And it's 30 feet off the ground. So we have a really good measurement of where that seat is. And it seemed impossible for anyone to hit a ball that far because that ball...
What's like a normal, like a really good home run today? How far would it go?
Yeah, like 450-foot home run is kind of a headline.
It's top notch. Okay. So 502 seems ridiculous.
Well, we've had some 500-foot home runs. I think we've had a handful in the StatCast era when we've been tracking home runs. But Ted Williams' home run would have gone about 530 feet. And we've never measured anything close to that in the StatCast era, which is why it's controversial. But the big revelation that we got from Weather Applied Metrics and looking at historical, stadium architecture was in 1946, Fenway Park was actually much shorter. It was about 40 feet in terms of its wind barrier. And also, conveniently at that time, there was a massive storm in the Northeast that day. And winds were measured during the day over 25 miles an hour. So that still happens today, but it never happens to a park as short as Fenway was in 1946. So long story short, Ted hit a ball really hard and it got up into this unabated stream of winds going super fast almost immediately. And that wind carried it all the way to that red seat in right field. And that ball, like we say now, would have gone 530 feet. But now all parks are built up really high to accommodate lots of seats. And the bigger parks provide this big wind barrier that kind of shield all the action from wind. So now it's almost impossible to get a ball to be carried by wind that far. But it wasn't in 1946.
So completely plausible. Okay. So, well, Clay, you're on your way to becoming a forensic meteorologist. Are there any other scenarios like that you want to kind of dissect and dig into? Anything else that stands out to you?
There's a couple of other things that we found from last year that are like more like persistent trends. The other like conspiracy theory I like to think about is the greatest game ever pitched. And that's Kerry Wood in 1998. He struck out 20 people. And if you see the video from this game, you'll see that his movement just looks amazing. Like his pitches move like wiffle balls this whole game. He strikes out 20 Astros and it seems incredible. And the thing that made me at least start thinking about if that game was wind impacted was the fact that Wrigley is one of the only places that can have a pitcher headwind. It's relatively small and it's in a very complex and windy environment typically. So it's one of the places that we can see pitcher headwinds routinely. Usually we still see tailwinds there, but we can see them there. And that day when Kerry Wood was pitching, the prevailing conditions were right to present headwinds. Headwinds and tailwinds for pitchers. Tailwinds increase the apparent velocity of a pitch because it doesn't slow down as much. It gets to the plate faster. But headwinds will slow down a pitch, but also create more movement. So your breaking ball breaks more, your sliders break more, and your fastballs ride a little higher. So I think most pitchers would prefer more movement than speed when it comes to wind impact. But that's all to say the weather situation that day in 1998 for Kerry Woods, the greatest game ever pitched were optimal for pitcher headwinds and a little bit of amplified movement. That's not to take anything away from Kerry Wood, because that game is incredible and he's an incredible pitcher, but the environment was also cooperating that day.
This almost feels like now a game of stats. And it's feeling like very Moneyball to me, where, with the right information, like the game could be played very, very well. Is that something you see in the future where like the weather is going to be accounted for a lot more than it currently is and really factored into decision making when it comes to the plays?
I'd like to be able to say that. I really think players dominate what happens on the field, and all data can do is help prepare them for what might happen. But players and talent and their instincts and the decisions they make in split seconds is always going to be more important and more valuable. We can really exhaust and analyze every piece of available data as analysts, as club analysts, but really the players are the ones who are going to control this long term.
Okay, I grew up in New England, so I grew up going to Fenway. That was kind of my home ballpark. But then as an adult, I moved to the Baltimore area. And so I spent a lot of time at Camden Yards. Is there anything you can tell me that's interesting about Camden Yards as far as wins?
Yeah, I was actually looking at our LiDAR scan of Baltimore recently, and it's unique. It is well barriered by the stands, but there's also a giant warehouse out in right field that creates another barrier. I think the idea is that most outfields are more open to receive wind currents, but Baltimore is uniquely closed off because of that giant and well barriered warehouse in right field. So it's, for an outdoor park, it's kind of wind shielded more than most. So if you look at its data in aggregate, you can see that even though the prevailing winds are pretty strong, the winds that affect hits and pitches are actually relatively small compared to other.
Yeah, it is close to the water too. Okay, what other weather elements do you foresee in the future being factored in, or is just wind the big one, so we're just going to stick with that? Or do you foresee Weather Applied Metrics doing other modeling of different weather elements?
I think and I'm speaking for them, out of turn. I think for baseball, air density is enormously important. Wind is enormously important. And those are things that we're just starting to get a better handle on. But the more we play in other venues, like we play in Mexico City at an elevation of 7,000 feet as kind of a jewel event, and that balls carry really well when the air is that thin. So it'll help clubs, I think, design parks based on the environment they're in, so that they can have at least the run environment that they think is appropriate for their team and for the league. So it'll help before parks are built, make sure that they're facing the right way or the right size. I think baseball is going to exhaust what we can do with weather. I think other sports will benefit. Like, for example, I think football, obviously the football is bigger and presents a bigger wind cross section. I can't help but look at Soldier Field right next to Lake Michigan and think that the wind has something to do with throwing a football in Soldier Field. So I think other sports will benefit the more they use this stuff.
I did a podcast on golf and weather recently, and there's a lot of parallels there, just given the difference in golf courses, and then also he was saying the wind was definitely the big factor there too.
Yeah, I think, and Weather Applied Metrics does do stuff for golf. Like golf, it matters a lot. The hard part about golf is being able to model trees, because they're so complex. They're not just, you can't assume that a tree is a cube. It's a little bit more complex than that. So modeling trees on golf courses, I think, is a little bit hard and a little bit, takes a little bit more computation, but it really does affect things because the balls, golf balls spin really fast. Velocity is much higher. So those aerodynamic forces are coming to play quite a bit.
Clay, is there anything else you want to add about your role as MLB scientist or anything about Weather Applied Metrics?
Yeah, my job is great. So if you want a job like me, try to think about math and baseball, and Weather Applied Metrics is great. Like it's great. It's born out of a really pure idea, and they've got some really smart people to help execute it. So it's a good company, and I think they're going to expand into other sports and any place that benefits from understanding the impact of the environment on sport.
Off the Radar is a production of the National Weather Desk. Make sure you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes published every Tuesday. Thank you to Morgan Adsit from Fox 45 in Baltimore and Clay Nunnally from the MLB for joining me today. Thanks to the National Weather Desk and Sinclair Broadcast Group for their ongoing support of the podcast. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie. Make it a great day.